Steve Franzik, a retired professor of political science from the U.S. Naval Academy.
I'm Diana Owen. I'm a professor of political science at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C.
Congratulations and welcome. My name is Tom Tinder and I'm an attorney from Charleston, West Virginia.
And would you please introduce yourselves?
Good afternoon. We are Foothill High School's Unit 6, representing the state of California. My name is Luke Ritchie.
My name is Allie Lamb.
And my name is Robert Gann. We would like to thank the judges, audience, and timekeeper for being here today, and we would like to introduce our coaches, Mr. McBride, Mr. Dedamore, and Mr. Constantelos.
Thank you very much. As you obviously know, we are in Unit 6, and we're doing question number 2, which I will read. President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for a disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Do you agree or disagree? Why? What disagreements did the founders have about a standing army, and are they relevant today? To what extent should there be an international U.S. military presence?" You may begin.
The military-industrial complex functions through a revolving door between private and public leadership, campaign contributions, and lobbying efforts, meaning that it operates at the expense of those underneath. We agree with President Eisenhower's warning of misplaced power because of two main factors: the undue dominance it gives to corporations domestically and the destructive militarism it necessitates.
Lobbyists and defense industry insiders consistently occupy prominent government positions, such as Defense Secretaries Lloyd Austin, Mark Esper, and James Mattis, and military spending is regularly made a top priority. For example, defense occupies over half of the Biden administration's $1.5 trillion budget request. We agree with Brown professor Heidi Peltier, who attributes these costs to payments of overly expensive military contractors and claims that their extreme profitability negatively impacts U.S. labor markets.
To maintain demand for these defense contractors, we are pressured into destructive warfare with a cost too often ignored: non-American lives. According to a Brown University study, direct war deaths of America's post-9/11 wars include 536 journalists, 807 humanitarian workers, and up to 335,000 other civilians, numbers that easily dwarf deaths of enemy combatants.
But the full extent of all of this can't be neatly quantified. Corporate influence in any form thrives when hiding from the public eye, and the scope of the defense industry is broader than defense budgets alone. Abroad, the secretive nature of drone warfare makes death tolls difficult to fully compile, let alone consequences such as damages to infrastructure. But what we do know is that the institution Eisenhower referred to has resulted in some of the deadliest policies in American history.
This concern with an excessive military goes back to America's conception. While the founders agreed that defense was needed, what should comprise it and when should it engage? James Madison, Samuel Adams, and many colonists strongly opposed a federal standing army, still remembering the oppressive British Empire. At the 1787 Constitutional Convention, Madison even stated that the means of defense against foreign danger have always been the instruments of tyranny at home.
Though today, Pew Research reports that 80% of Americans trust the military, the founders' concerns remain relevant. Their fears have been realized in events like the Kent State Massacre or the clearing of Lafayette Square just last summer, both instances in which the U.S. National Guard has used force against civilians.
On the other hand, Alexander Hamilton supported a standing army, claiming in Federalist 25 that the Constitution could shield against its potential evils and that a militia would take too long to form in times of crises, as seen with Shays' Rebellion in 1786. Additionally, Hamilton cites that the burden to contribute to a state-led force would unevenly fall on larger states like New York, ending in a rivalry within the Union. With novel military technology and bloated budgets, we have created a force of Adams' worst nightmare.
These concerns only grow when examining international influence, which now defines America's exorbitant military activity. We believe the U.S. should decrease the extent of its influence worldwide, as we cannot reliably be omniscient and righteous in our interventions. And we believe citing possible conflicts rather than real ones, like Cold War-era domino theory, is not proper justification for war.
Beyond direct involvement in war, we must also decrease indirect influence, such as weapons sales, which presidents regularly use to stoke violence in their interests. The only way Congress can stop such deals is if both chambers vote against it, a check difficult to rely on with ubiquitous partisan ties and patronage systems.
We propose making only one chamber's vote no enough to prevent weapons sales. This would ensure more caution and deliberation, which must underlie our discourse instead of profit, when the US exacts its most rapid and potentially damaging form of change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As you might guess, we've got some follow-up questions. I'd like to ask a question that is in the broad aspect of Unit 6, and that is that legislation to make election laws more strict has been proposed in many states. Why do you think this is being in the discussion at this point in time, and what do you think we should do about it? Are you in favor of stricter election laws?
I think that with the controversial atmosphere surrounding the past two elections, 2016 and 2020, the entirety of America has grown a new sense of paranoia in some cases, but also just a greater attitude of caution towards the security of our elections. And I would argue that many have taken this advantage of this trend in order to pass new legislations that I personally do not agree with, and I don't think my unit mates would agree with it either. We believe that a lot of the voting restrictions claim to act in the name of security, but instead make it more difficult for people who are not familiar with the American culture, who do not speak English as a first language, and minorities who are not as wealthy to have their voice heard in government.
And I
I would
think that
agree. Go ahead, Luke.
even regardless of the voter suppression, as has been mentioned, many of our governmental institutions are have an inherent aristocratic quality to them, as influenced by the ideas of Aristotle or Plato, who believed in a certain political class taking action and getting engaged in civic virtue, or as what Thomas Jefferson described in one letter as a natural aristocracy among men. And I think that these generally run counter to what we often think are the ideal system of government, in which the people have more control. And so that those kind of undemocratic systems and the voter suppression that reinforce them should definitely be taken care of.
You mentioned the domino theory in your opening remarks. Could you please explain in greater detail what is meant by the domino theory and give some examples?
The domino theory was a general basic theory that the spread of communism would slowly overtake governments, install communist regimes throughout the world. And the theory was that unless the United States and Western allies fought to maintain democracy and capitalism in those states, eventually communism would become the dominant political philosophy in the world, and thus bring about untold suffering, such as the tragedies occurring in the USSR, where millions upon people were starving because of their unfunctional government. And I think that the reason we cite domino theory as a poor example of American military intervention is because it was mainly based on possibilities, not on hardcore facts. It was based on sort of paranoia and fear rather than basis. And we see that in examples like McCarthyism, where this abstract motivation for war allowed us to do things unimaginable to the average person who would expect America to uphold democracy and all these values that we were originally trying to spread.
I would point to in a broad example, such as the 1954 coup in Guatemala, which, while founded overtly on the basis of combating communism, what really happened was the government had instituted some very basic land reforms to benefit the peasants of Guatemala, but this was at the expense of the United Fruit Company. And the United Fruit Company heavily engaged in lobbying and publicity campaigns to convince the US government that there had communist associations when there were none. And the coup led to a far-right dictator and a subsequent genocide and civil war with the indigenous peoples of Guatemala. And so we see that as, to paraphrase what historian and political scientist Michael Parenti once said, the fear our fear of communism taking over the world hasn't been as great as the fact that the fear of the anti-communism already has taken over.
And I'd like to further connect the domino theory we reference in our testimony to ideas outside of communism, and this idea that we need to act proactively in front of these issues before they're actually happening, or even just extending it far past. For example, after the attacks on 9/11, the US continued to have boots on the ground in Afghanistan in the name of combating Islamic terrorism. However, we've now been there for 20 years, and just now in 2020, President Biden has been playing with and put out the idea of taking our troops out of here, just because this prolonged presence in Afghanistan is ultimately becoming more drawn out and not as focused on the actual removal of ISIS anymore as it was in 2011.
Your last comments related to your proposal about having one chamber of Congress being able to vote no on appropriations and so forth. Please give us more details and more information about that proposal.
I think our unit would go as far as to propose a constitutional amendment, which would allow one chamber of either the House or or Congress to, either the House or the Senate, if they were to vote no on buying a large amount of weapons from one of the large defense manufacturers such as Raytheon or Lockheed Martin, that we would either have to change around that proposal or just simply not purchase that amount of weapons, because what we see in Congress is this lobbying that has gone far too far to intertwine corporations and the U.S. government. For example, Representative Mac Thornberry of Texas was instrumental in 2013 to 2014 with Raytheon being his top donor in passing a bill later that purchased large amounts of weapons from Raytheon to the U.S. government.
This is also based in the sale of weapons organized by presidents. Presidents, while being given commander-in-chief in Article 2, Section 2, being the vesting clause, they still have very few parameters as to what those kinds of powers can mean. And we see that presidents like Ronald Reagan have used that to sell record amounts of weaponry to countries like Saudi Arabia, who in turn give those to armed terrorists and extremists in the region. And the UN Human Rights Committee has even condemned US and its allies for that activity. And in the case of that Reagan deal and many other deals, what happens is that the House of Representatives, being very large, is difficult to lobby. So the president and corporate interests can then concentrate their lobbying efforts on the Senate, which is what Obama administrations and other administrations did in order to proliferate large amounts of weaponry. And so we would say that having more deliberation and having a tighter vetting process for such deals would be beneficial in preventing the U.S. from encouraging the kind of atrocities like we see in Saudi Arabia.
Your generation has a relatively low level of voting participation. What can or should we be doing about that?
I would first point to civic education in a program like We the People and being really instrumental as something that could be more prevalent in our just American general education system to be something really important. I know in personal experience, We the People has been the first academic class that I've taken that has really engaged me civically and taught me about more the ins and outs of our government and how we can personally be involved.
Thank you.
I would say that politically, we would need to take more steps in order to make sure that people's votes count. The military-industrial complex is not unique to the defense industry in that we see this corporate dominance drowning out the voices of most regular people. If we're supposed to vote with our wallets, then the average person doesn't have nearly as much of a vote as the Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates of the world. And I think that this is actually something we can work to try to take down and structures outside of purely electoral politics. We've seen organizations like the Black Panthers be very successful in organizing and helping educate within their community, providing breakfast to school children, and that kind of direct action, which is very effective when the votes alone aren't getting the job done.
Under what circumstances, if any, should the National Guard be deployed domestically?
I would say not many. While we point to Kent State from the 1900s in our testimony, I would point to another example of the Army being deployed to scatter protests in Washington, D.C. in 1932 of the bonus armies, which were veterans coming home from the war demanding their bonuses, and the Army came and disbanded them with tear gas. I would say that these are two examples of clearly not the right way and time to deploy federal forces. And I would say that the only instances in which they should be are if an immediate danger is posed, which in these situations it was not.
Good
Okay.
timing, good timing. Well, thank you very much. I think you did an excellent job. You gave us some solutions when we threw out some problems, which is good to not just talk about the problems themselves. You had some good examples, some broad examples, which I think were good. You were responsive to the questions that I asked. And I think overall you did an excellent job. I want you to kind of remember that you're in a kind of a rarefied atmosphere here in terms of being in the national finals of We the People, that you are part of those intelligent citizens in our society who we count on. If you look back historically, most major change has come about because small groups of citizens, well-informed, have organized and moved forward. So go get them.
I also agree that you did a really good job with your presentation. I like the way that you started out with the idea of the revolving book door, and you identified the stakeholders that were involved in that whole process. I thought you did a good job of talking about the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. The one thing, it only came up a little bit in the Q&A, might have been to bring the Constitution into the discussion a little bit more, but that's just a small point. I think you set up your prepared remarks in a way that prompted a lot of questions in my mind, which is a good thing, because it allows us to pursue the topics and have a conversation that can get into greater depth. And I thought that you did an especially good job of answering the question about the domino theory, where you explained what the theory was in very concise but extremely sophisticated way, and then gave multiple examples. So I think that was a really excellent answer to that question. I also thought that you kind of jumped into a question that didn't have much to do with the question that was prepared, and had a good response to that. You didn't let it throw you at all. So I also like the fact that you related points that the founders had made, some of the considerations that they had, to things that are happening in the present day and historically. So I think overall a really great job.
Well, congratulations to you for a well-reasoned presentation here today. I know that my two colleagues who are professors, I'm sure enjoyed your presentation, because at least to me, you presented it in a very professorial manner, in that you laid out the situations, you laid out the facts, you answered our questions, and you provided us with all the information and the responses that were right on point with what we were asking you about. I also wanted to second the comments that were made as it related to, when you came up with talking about the domino theory, and you came up with Guatemala and the United Fruit Company and Afghanistan, those were just right on point. And the Kent State references were right on point. As I say, very illustrative and appropriate examples of the points that you were making. And I also appreciated and enjoyed the comments about having just one chamber vote on appropriations, but I don't know how, and getting a constitutional amendment, I don't know how realistic that is. I think it's a great idea, but in today's ultra partisanship, that would be very difficult. But overall, I just think you did a great job, and you came across just what this We the People program is all about. You know, we're supposed to be a congressional panel, and you all are supposed to be the experts. Hopefully, we did a fair job in asking questions and probing questions, but you all exceeded the expectations of being experts in providing us with all the feedback and information and proposals that a congressional panel would need. And let me just conclude by seconding the comments that Steve alluded to, and that is it's clear that you have a tremendous amount of knowledge, and you demonstrate outstanding leadership qualities. And as you go forth out of your high school career and then perhaps higher education and then continuing on to be good citizens, please make sure that you stay involved and participate and use your leadership skills and your knowledge so that we can have you can have a better community, a better state, and we can have a better nation. Best of luck to you. Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, and thank your teacher.